Hello and welcome to Talking About My Generation. I'm Herb Ricardo here with Alicia Vassar and Rich Grego, our own philosophy guru. And today we're going to have a pretty neat conversation. I'm certainly looking forward to it. And it's The Confederacy of Souls by Antonio Tabucci. And here in his novel, he talks about, imagine being in a courtroom, and instead of being convicted of a crime or having a judge and jury looking at you from something that you did, it's a courtroom of your mind and you. And maybe thinking about some of the things that you haven't done in your life, and the things that passed you by, and how you led your life, and whether or not you led your life in a good way. And there's a lot of ideas behind this, and we're gonna talk about them. And if you think about the philosophy of self, we're influenced by so many things in our lives from the time that we're born to the time that we die, right? And the question is who are we? Are we one person? Are we just a quick collection of all these externalities? Or are we constantly evolving throughout the years that we live? And I think this is just a great philosophical topic that at one point the three of us have spoken about. And I think today what we'll do is just talk about it in a kind of more specific way. So I'm going to open this up to Rich and give us a little bit more of an insight into it.
Oh, okay. Well, the book, it's been a while since I became acquainted with, I became acquainted with it, and I don't remember a lot of the details. But again, I think yeah, you guys correct me if I'm wrong. The gist of the book is that, um, feel free to read it. Anybody for whom it sounds interesting, but it is that this person sort of winds up on trial, as you say, for something that isn't clear, and ultimately not sure of the identity of the self that committed this infraction, whatever it was, which is kind of a cool, for me personally, it was kind of a cool theme. And it's one, incidentally, that you see in a lot of Western sort of postmodern existentialist kind of literature. I think Herbie directed a post-interview question to me about that. And I know if you've ever read The Trial by Kafka, by Franz Kafka, it's a very similar story and theme to that. There's a book my students directed. I bought it and read it because so many of them raved about it. If anybody's interested, it's called House of Leaves. I cannot remember the author. I'm sorry, but you can check it out if you want. Same kind of theme, really bizarre book. Really a truly postmodern work of chaos and confusion. But pretty interesting. And they're all on that theme of who are we and what is self-identity. When you're going through life playing a million roles in a million different contexts for a million different people and a million different relationships throughout years and years of life, where you go through all kinds of transformations. Who are you really? Are you anything? Are you ever anyone? Is there ever any single you? We of course, right, we all like to think so, and maybe that's the fiction that keeps us all sane throughout life. But is there a real you? And it's an important question. It's not really just a philosophical question. It's what everybody ultimately wrestles with when they're lying in bed at night, to when they're at different jobs, going through a career and transforming roles and transforming who they are and seeing themselves in different situations and realizing different possibilities for themselves. So I think it's a great question to ponder. So there you go.
It,
If that
it
that's
definitely makes it definitely makes my head kind of spin thinking about the endless possibilities. And I'm a very anxious person, so I think through possibilities of things. Um, so this kind of question, it definitely made me I guess think in that aspect of how I like things very regimented
Mm,
in a certain way,
yeah.
and I like to understand things and I like them to be consistent, and that's just not how people work. I
Mm,
think that's kind of the reality that you kind of come to through this philosophy.
yeah. I guess if you're autistic, you do. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying that to be at all sarcastic or anything.
I
I mean,
at first that's the way my mind thought about it, is the
yeah.
fact that because that's the way my mind processes the world.
Mm,
So for me, it's definitely I I like consistency and regimentedness. So the idea that there's so many different people that you can get
mm,
yourself, all of those things, it's very
yeah.
large and overwhelming in a lot of ways. But I still found I definitely came back around to finding the beauty of it,
Mm,
because it kind of reminded me of our conversation on like wabi sabi and how
yeah.
there's kind of imperfection and kind of accepting the imperfections
Yeah.
and aging gracefully and all of those things.
Mm,
So, what's interesting, and I've used this line before, and I've used it in class, and I think even in a couple of our podcasts, and that is that, from the time that we're born, for the most part, a lot of our parents and a lot of society wants us to move in what we call a linear way. We're growing up in a kind of, if you can think about this, almost in a straight line, right? You're a child, and then you go through teenagers, and then young adult, then older person, whatever, and we've got these things that we're supposed to do, right? We go through school, we make friends, and then we finish school, meaning K through 12, right? Primary school, and then we go on to, or we do a secondary school, and then we go to college, or maybe we don't. We get a job, we
yeah.
meet more friends, we get maybe another job, we buy a house, maybe we don't, maybe we rent, but we do all this, and we're programmed always to have an idea of what that next step is. So
Yeah.
you'll even hear people say, an economist will even say, that person, a 30-year-old should be on their first house, they should be buying their first
Mm,
house, and if you've got an Italian mother, or a Spanish mother, or an Irish mother, they'll say, you need to start thinking about getting married soon.
yeah.
And then once you do that, it's time to have kids, right? And there's a pattern of of linear, right?
Yeah.
But when we look at this, Confederacy of Souls, and recognize that every day and every week and every month that we're on this planet, on this world, we're influenced by our friends, by our family, by circumstance, what's happening, wars in different environments. Even if the war doesn't affect our society per se, what people say and the people around us, the ecology. Do we live in a house where there's a lot of foliage around there? Do we live in the country? Do we live in suburbia? Do we live in the city? Right? All these things. And then do we move? Do we start
Mhm.
off living in the country and then we move to the city? Then we go back to suburbia. Then we go back to the country. And so, uh, even though our society is trying to put us in this linear path, do we mentally live in a linear way? And I think a lot of if you think of people who now are a little bit older, we've got Alicia over here who's younger than us, and we can reflect back on times that maybe we should have done something different, interacted with different people, and that's a lot of what Antonio Tabucci talks about. Not so much
Yeah.
where we are today, but why didn't we think about some of the opportunities that we had for ourselves? Were we too comfortable in the way that we were? Right, Rich? Something.
Yeah. Yeah. And there. the issue of self-identity is one that philosophically is one that it's sort of an area I'm very interested in, and it's one that's very close to at the heart of where I sort of work and research and philosophy. And there are lots of schools of thought about that. And in terms of sort of linear pathway through life, I think everybody senses that. I mean, Alisha, I mean, she's not the same person she was when she was 5, right? And then when she was 12, and then when she was 15, and when she's, where she is now. And the same as us, we've just gone through different progressive stages, and maybe a few more. But I think one of the big questions is, are you really the same person? And I sent you guys an essay I had written, and there were a few interesting empirical studies that came out of that. There was one fascinating one because it was the longest one. I may have even mentioned this. I almost remember talking about this on another podcast. But it was a study they did, a follow-up kind of study they did where it was the University of Glasgow, I believe, where they took a group of many, many people and gave them a personality test when they were 15. And then they gave them another one. And I guess I don't know if they did it throughout their lives. And then they ended when they were 70. And what they found, interestingly, was none of those people, clinically anyway, on these tests resembled at 70, resembled at all the person that they were when they were 15. So, the idea being that, at least empirically, with the tools we use to measure such things, you can't establish that you are the same person throughout your life. And if that's the case, are you not the same person maybe in different contexts? Are you not the different person on a job than you are when you're out with friends? I mean, really a different person, or when you're with your family, or as we all discover when we fall in love and begin to have intimate relationships, there's definitely, at least in my experience, a different you, in a sense, that you are when you're with somebody you love intimately. And I guess that can just be family members as well as a romantic partner. And that's a kind of a radical thing to think about. If you truly are in a very, or just asking yourself the question, is there, in some sense, a me that persists throughout what I call my life, or not? And that just seems to me a fundamental question we need to ask ourselves on a lot of levels, because the implications personally, on the job, social policy, whether you, like in this novel, are going to hold people or you're going to hold people responsible, morally culpable for something they did 20 years ago, when they were kids. Because if you and hopefully they don't with the child with the youth that Herb and I have had. And are you going to hold yourself responsible?
Yes.
One of the things that weighs heavily on me, I carry lots of guilt through my life, and I talk to my wife about it, and she always tells me, you're not the same, even if what you did was as bad as you recollect it, you're not that person anymore. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, right? Those kind of questions are so important. So I won't monologue anymore about it. I'd like to know what you think, but I think that's why it's an important question to ask.
I'm not a Catholic priest, but confession is going to be okay in this particular podcast. So, Alisha, what do you think?
I was going to talk about kind of what you were bringing up about these kind of linear paths that we're given, and what the good life looks like. And you kind of gave a bunch of different perspectives. Maybe that's getting a house, maybe that's children, maybe that's those things. But I feel like with understanding that concept that we are these different people, it does give me a sense of like we have a radical choice to define ourselves. So in a lot of senses, it feels freeing for me, because it's like, okay, if I can be a different person, or I'm an amalgamation of everything around me, that there is something I can do to kind of influence that. There's something that I can do to there's something I can do to make a difference. It's something for me to work towards.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
For me, I find it very liberating.
Do
sure.
you? Yeah. And
Yeah,
I guess, existentialist philosophers talk about that in the sense they talk about what they call existential freedom. And when you hear a writer like Sartre, Camus, talk about things like that, they talk about this notion of like every minute, every second, really, you're choosing who you are. Um, and that's simultaneously, right, a very liberating thought, but also a really heavy thought, right? Um, because it places a huge burden on you, and it also places a dizzying kind of liberation on your soul, because you really don't have any guarantee about who you're going to be tomorrow, or who you should.
And you don't have a lot of control also. Like for me,
Mm,
I'm reflecting on the fact that my work has massively changed.
mm,
I work at a small business, a like smoke shop, and it's a different clientele. I just do cashiering stuff. I don't have my work, I'm not as highly involved in it as before. So it's like I'm getting to redefine myself. I'm doing a lot more crafts and things in this job. I have a lot more free time to indulge in those things that I really do,
mm,
like reading or consuming art wise.
mm,
So there's definitely this sense of you don't have control because obviously I chose the job that I chose. And there's those implications and things, but changing of jobs and things, that's normal throughout life. And seeing the difference that it makes in how, I guess, my identity and the different parts of myself that flourish here that didn't flourish in other parts. So
yeah.
I'm definitely highly aware of that now, experiencing it, seeing the difference in my work.
And I think what will happen, Alicia, and Rich, you and I have had this conversation a number of times, and that is, how the particular jobs that we've had have influenced how we are. When I was a healthcare administrator, and hundreds of people relied on the decisions that I made. I was very conservative in the way that I thought. I was very structured in my answers to each one of my employees,
mm,
patients, when we had legal problems and talking with lawyers, and we had finance issues, and I had presidents of the company and everything else. I was very, again, I was very conservative. I was very thoughtful about how and disciplined about how I was answering. Then I moved into higher education, and I was a professor, and I didn't have all that responsibility of taking care of patients and my staff, and what how the business was going to look and the company was going to look to everybody else, and that obviously influenced how I see the world, and I probably see the world now, not as critical in one sense, critical from higher education from that perspective and from my
yeah,
students and everything else,
yeah,
but not from that area. And and I have changed. I know that I have changed, right? And so the question is what does that really mean to us? How much control do we have, right? I didn't know that I was going to behave that way, and
yeah,
I didn't purposefully say I need to behave more conservatively now that I'm in higher education. I can be a little bit more liberal with my decision making. I didn't consciously think that way, but I evolved that way. And
mm,
as you get older, you evolve that way versus the way that you evolve from being 14 or 15 years old to a 25-year-old or to a 20-year-old. I mean,
yeah,
remember, a 14 to a 20-year-old is only 6 years. Okay, but think of the amount of difference
yeah,
a 14-year-old and a 20-year-old has, but then think of the difference between a 50 and a 56-year-old person has.
right.
Almost insignificant, you would think,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because
absolutely.
of the influence of time and what has infiltrated their minds.
Yeah, I agree. What do you guys think? I'm just curious. You know, there's right, I guess the opposite sides of this debate are, a lot of sides, but I mean, that was sort of the main issue is, are, I don't know, are you the same person? Do you feel I mean, you've been calling yourselves the same. We've all been calling ourselves the same person, had the same driver's license and social security card and all that kind of stuff. And the law treats us the same throughout our lives, and resumes and employers treat us as though we've lived this continuous existence. And the Herb of now is going to be judged by on the basis of the Herb 20 years ago. When you look at his resume, is that inaccurate? Is there a core witness self that inhabits all of us? That, yeah, we go through changes, but there is this, again, that's quite in the Eastern traditions. They talk about a witness, a transcendental witness behind all the changes that you go through. Or are we truly just different people through our whole lives? What do you think?
I think especially because when you brought up the implications on relationship, because I was thinking about the fact that if we're always an ever-changing person, how are we the same person that you love,
Yeah.
essentially?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for me, I have to say that there has to be some level of me that is still there to some capacity.
Yeah.
Because I would like to think the same for my partner, that that's 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 who I love,
Yeah.
is genuinely David. And it's all the bits and pieces that make up him. He may change, he may evolve as a person, but there's still a core person that I fell in love with.
That's so
And
profound.
that's interesting to, because
Yeah.
haven't you been in a relationship for quite a while?
Yeah. I've been most of my life. I've been married for how long has it been? 40 years. I'm going getting, getting close to 40 years now.
Yeah, I was going to say 39
So
years. Yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, I mean, literally, I have literally grown with this, literally through life with this person. And you know, there's an interesting book by another psychologist. I'll just hold it up. Kenneth Gergen. It's an old book now, but it's, I think, a classic. It's called The Saturated Self. And it was written in the 90s, but it's still pretty current. And very interesting. He talks about exactly what we're talking about. We got, hence the title, The Saturated Self, and about how really the demands of earlier societies had sort of forced people to play a certain role throughout their lives and maintain this at least illusion of a core self-identity. Whereas now the modern sort of Western postmodern world, this commercial culture we live in, where everybody's moving and changing all the time, and circumstances are, people are liberated to just be all these different people at once, right? He has a term for it. He calls it multiphrenia. He says people in our society have this condition he calls multiphrenia. I guess like schizophrenia, but
Right,
multiphrenia, multiple
right.
selves. Um, and he said one of the big things he found as a psychologist is when you look at people, when you look at people's lives as they go through their lives and they're married, or have just in any kind of relationship, right? How many relationships for most people ever last throughout their lives, right? A very, very small percentage, right? And, you know, his notion is that, you know, when you meet somebody, you're meeting a certain self, and that self is going to inevitably change. They're going to evolve, and they're going to be different selves in different circumstances that, and as you guys pointed out, they may not even have any control over, in a sense. Different experiences may change them, and all of a sudden you're in this relationship with a strange person, at least to some extent, right? You're not evolving in a way that's in sync. So I think that's a really profound point you make, Alisha, because I have no clue why my relationship has lasted 40 years. It's a mystery to me. It really,
Well,
really is, because, you
yeah.
know, I don't
Um,
know.
so, again, in listening to especially relationships, that is, when you're in a relationship, it's a kind of a constant give and take, give and take, give and take, and you're growing with them, right? And so what happens is that there's a comfort level, and that comfort level, and there are individuals who grow collectively together at the same level. There are
Yeah.
people in relationships who actually grow apart, right? One
Yeah.
person might, when they both started, they didn't have too much money, they didn't have a whole lot going on. The one partner goes to school, gets a degree, gets another degree, gets a job, gets a higher paying job. The other person is still doing the same thing, and and now they can still continue to grow emotionally in that same level, and that's enough to keep it. But then sometimes what might happen is that other person who's kind of growing with all these different, it doesn't matter of the two, but what happens is they might be seeking something else now. And so
Yeah.
then that's where that
Yeah.
parts, right? And
Yeah.
and in this notion and what you're talking about, Rich, is, do we have a dominant personality? Do we
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
and we do have the idea behind this is we have multiple personalities in the sense of sometimes we can be very introverted. Maybe we don't want to spend time with friends. We want to spend time at home and just kind of recharge our own batteries. Other times we're feeling more gregarious and we want to be out with our friends. And that's what we're seeking because maybe we spent too much time. After the pandemic, a lot of this happened. People wanted to get out and interact with people, but then suddenly they started to, come back into their, they love their watching their movies and having their food at home and everything else. But the point though is, the other thing too is, take how we drive. I might be a very kind person, and people might see me as a very kind person. Then I get behind the wheel of my car and
Mhm.
suddenly I'm
Yeah.
driving and
Yeah.
everyone's driving slow. They're cutting
Yeah.
from me. I get angry. I get frustrated, and
Yeah.
I start, driving very erratically. And I almost change my whole personality. They're like, my goodness, we would never have thought that you would
Yeah.
behave this way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There might be a time where I might appear very courageous and stand up for somebody. But then I could be in an environment where somebody's being not treated very well, and I don't stand up for them. And then I question myself 2 days later or a month later and say, why didn't you? Ordinarily, you would do that. So
Yeah.
so what are those characteristics and factors that are changing my particular personality at that particular time, even though I don't want to necessarily behave that way?
Yeah. And I guess, right, there's a whole school of psychology called personality psychology, called or whatever. I guess it's called a school of thought they call situational
Yeah,
psychology,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is, and they've been, you have that famous Stanford prison experiment, for
Right,
instance,
right.
right, where you get all these students, all of a sudden they turn into monsters, and they were like the nicest people before they got into that environment. And that's it's a very interesting phenomenon, isn't it?
And then
And
they had to go through, sorry, then they had to go through therapy after it because that's not the way they wanted to behave. And they were
yeah,
almost forced to behave a way that they didn't want to be forced to.
yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And on the subject of marriage, when you look at it again, sort of through history, there was I don't know, 5 decades, 7 decades ago, most marriages lasted, right? And then you started to get this to a point, right, where this, after the 50s, after the 60s, the notorious 60s and into the 70s, it got to the point where, you'd have over 50% of marriages failed. And it got worse and worse and worse. And now I understand, and there are people who know more about these stats than I do, but it's gotten better. But I have heard that this is because most people aren't even getting married. Marriage is falling out of fashion. And that's really the only reason why marriages aren't, are lasting more, are statistically. So that what that tells me is that what this Kenneth Gergen, for instance, found is becoming, that trend is maybe becoming, I don't want to call it worse. Maybe there's nothing sacred about marriage and it's an outmoded institution or whatever. And maybe relationships, maybe even monogamous relationships for life, aren't natural to the human condition. I don't know. So maybe we shouldn't lament their passing. But I think it's an interesting notion that when people are liberated to be more and more free in this existentialist sense, they do seem to become and transform and evolve into different people. And that makes it really hard to play that role for the rest of your life. I suppose, Herb, your area of expertise, that may be the same trend that's occurring now in the workforce. I mean, I don't know, but.
Yeah, yeah. There's no doubt that how people behave in the workforce is a little bit different. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of pivot to that because I was going to bring something up which I think Alicia would be quite interested in, and that is in the sense of that how social media is kind of forcing us to behave a certain way, and think about it because we behave a certain way for social media, it's a boomerang effect. Then we respond to how we believe we should be behaving on social media. Let's just say a cultural characteristic of software, okay, let's call it Instagram or Facebook, right? We get on with our friends and everything else. We want to project a sense of who we are, right? I'm a professor. I want people to think that I'm smart and I'm knowledgeable and everything else, right? So I do that and I put that on there. I get feedback about how smart you are and everything else, and then that changes my persona of what everybody is telling me what I am, and so now I'm going to go out there and behave that way.
Yeah.
Alicia.
You were dead on. I was just thinking
Hmm.
about social media so much because I think there is things that's like, yes, people are getting married less. And I've seen in particular Gen Z is just less likely to start relationships. They're less likely to be having sex.
Hmm.
They're a lot, I mean, in general, there's a loneliness crisis. Um, but one of the things that I was thinking when you were bringing up, like, is this kind of just naturally kind of a reflection on whether or not these relationships are just a thing that we're supposed to have, or like whether or not they should work out? Um, I think on the fact that crap, I completely lost track of where I was
You're transformed into a different person right before our eyes. And you think
I
that's
know,
what
I know.
yeah.
Um, Social media, like there is this influence, this outside influence that I think is affecting whether or not people like we've talked about how it can have an isolating effect on people, social media. So I think instead of thinking of it as a natural evolution of, whether or not this relationship or thing is supposed to work, it's how are we being distorted by, because we've talked a lot about how there's so many external factors that influence who you see yourself as.
Yeah.
You know, if you think about it, before social media and before the computers and before we were on this kind of video phone system, this is the old term for what we're doing right now, right? Um, and you worked in a particular position. You were a teacher, you were a nurse. um, a lot of it, I think, was fairly contained to who you were. Sure, the environment, the culture of the hospital or the school might influence a little bit, right? But you were around other teachers, you were around other nurses and doctors, and there was a kind of a way that you were going to behave, and you as a person who wanted to go into that service, you knew there was a way that you wanted to behave, right? So that was then. Now, because of seeing, let's say, a nurse on a form of social media, you'll find a kind nurse, a mean nurse, empathetic, and all these different suddenly you feel that you can either craft some of those different personalities of what a nurse should be, like a professor. I can be a professor who I appear aloof. I can be a professor that I can be very strict, and everything in between, right? And I wonder if our modern society is forcing us to behave differently in different environments. And when you look at because of what social media is, and let's take the dating sites and everything else, where you should, men should be a certain height, women should look a certain way, men should have a certain amount of income, women should be a level of whether it might be submissiveness or dominating in whatever area. But the point though is it's telling the individual who wants to put their profile on there, you cannot be yourself. You have to be what we're telling you to be, right? And the same thing almost in the workplace too. If you want this job, you can't be who you are, even though the company may want you as you are, but the environment is telling you no. The environment is telling you you need to be and act a different way.
But do you guys think that has just been sort of amplified in the current milieu with social media and stuff? Wasn't it always that way, right? People go out on dates and they'd be phony, right? It was right at first dates, or they'd go in for a job interview, and who's ever really going to be themselves in a job interview, or at least I don't know. Do you think that's just the way human relations are condemned to be, or are they, I mean, I know certainly social media liberates you in a lot of respects to be a gazillion things, be anything you want. It's no responsibility. So you can go into any site and be anything you want. But I don't know, is it just amplifying this multi-phrenia kind of a thing? Or is it, I don't know, or is it really creating it, I guess? I
I
don't know.
think it is amplifying it. Um, Maybe it's because I'm just like a very chronically online person, but I've seen a lot of influencer culture. And I think one of the most like
Yeah.
striking things that I saw one time was like the fact that people would rent out um the ability to sit in like a private airline. Like the plane doesn't ever go up or anything, but it's just so they can
Oh,
take a picture and present online that they are in a private airline and get, I guess, the clout that comes with that. So I think in a lot of aspects, it has amplified it. But on the opposite end of it, I think it's also amplified authenticity in certain ways because I
really?
know
How
a
so?
lot more people seek out in their content. And that's why influencers were originally. And I think that's kind of where the influencer way is going is people are looking for authentic people, genuine people. They're seeing that there is a facade, that there's an easy way that you can grift, make money off of presenting yourself in a specific way. So I have seen where content creators have become more and more relatable in a sense that
Mm,
there's like editing styles, people leaving in little flubs and things like that.
mm,
There's certain aspects that I see that people are seeking that authenticity. So I think there's in a sense like we know that all of this is fake in a sense, um, but we're still trying to find ways to make it
mm,
um feel more authentic. And I think that's good because you get a lot of people that they their identity when it's based off of like their culture, they're able to present that to people and they're able to show in a wide, platform, um, and share with people, connect with people. So I think there is, now that I'm thinking about it, there's two ends of it. There's one end where yes, it is exacerbating the inauthenticity, the but on the other end of the spectrum,
mm.
there we are still trying
Yeah.
to find a way to not, I guess, be as influenced by the way social media can distort things.
Is it possible, guys? I'd ask you this to both of you guys, since you brought that up, Alicia. Is authenticity? Is there an authentic Alicia? Is there an authentic Herb? Um,
That's so hard because there is, I've seen like a joke on a show that I had watched, and it was the first time I had ever been thought that it had been brought up to my mind that younger people are very into authenticity and down to earthness. Um, but knowing what authenticity is in a world where you are perpetually being influenced,
mm,
um, I just think from the aspect of, I think historically how we're influenced. I think politically, um, how we're influenced. There's so many aspects. As a feminist, I see how patriarchy influences all of us in the way that we're. So there's definitely influence there.
yeah. And I think even if you're trying your best to just be candid and open and in the moment and spontaneously you, as Tabucci would say, or Kafka or Jean-Paul Sartre, um, which self, which self is going to come out? If you want to be real, who you really are, which one is it, right? And I don't know, it's a confusing question. It can be downright scary, I guess, depending on what you're concerned about. Like that old
Mhm.
Billy Joel song. Remember that Billy Joel song? Or do you even know who Billy Joel is, Alicia?
I love Billy Joel.
Oh, do you?
I
Of course, I
love,
shouldn't have
that's
asked.
why I was like, what Billy Joel song?
The Billy Joel song, The Stranger,
This,
right?
The
yeah.
String? Oh, I don't know that one.
Oh, you don't
Yeah.
know that?
Well,
Oh,
you would if you heard it.
yeah, that would be
Yeah,
a
if
great
I heard it,
outtake.
I probably.
We should have played that at the end of the show while we were waving goodbye.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Again, um, I think that we have a dominant characteristic. I think we have a dominant personality. Um, but saying that, I think we also are very good at hiding them. So, even though people will say to me, "Oh, you're the same person you used to be in high school, whatever," and I'm going, "No, I'm not. I'm clearly
Mhm.
not the same person,
Yeah.
right?"
Yeah.
But what they're finding is they're finding that piece of that character that is the same, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Obviously, I'm more knowledgeable. I've gone to school. All the influences of my jobs, my friends, the travels, all those things clearly have changed. And and the question though is um, does that matter? Okay, does it matter that that we're conscious about what the influences are? And if you're a philosopher, it is because you want to start thinking more about why do you think the way that you do? And I love to try to understand why I think. As a matter of fact, um, and again, because I love politics, I can always, and I try to always see both sides of an argument, right? Uh, and you know, and I think a lot of people want to be this way. I think people want to be this way. I think the problem, though, is that you're conditioned to think one way. And when you're conditioned to think one way and you can't seem to try to, at least to understand. That doesn't mean you will agree with whatever, but at least try to understand why they're thinking the way that they are. And you can do this on a political spectrum. You can put it. You can do this on an economic spectrum, whether you agree in tariffs or you don't agree with tariffs. You can do this on a psychological spectrum, whether or not people have multiple personalities or they don't. Right? I mean, all these factors, and I think one of the great things about life is that you can put all these things into your mind, and your brain is just a brilliant computer, and you can rationalize and reason or not reason with something, and then it comes out. We talk about these things because the question is whether or not we want to we want our lives to be better, because if we understand how we make decisions, as soon as we're able to, why not try to take the the experiences and bring them into our system, and have them elevate the way we want to be, uh,
Yeah.
for lack of a better way of thinking.
I had a question for you guys, kind of on the aspect of, we're questioning whether or not, you are the same person and all those things. But I wanted to ask, is there something that you think is, I think I'm using this word right, immutably you? Like even through changing over years, that you can consistently say, this is this is me. This is something that I guess a principle or the way that you see things. For me, I guess it's definitely a passion for life and advocating for life. I know since even I was very little, I used to be very annoying to my mom about supporting BP oil because I had heard about a BP oil spill one time and I was furious.
Mm.
Um, that even as a what I was probably like 7 or 8. I started young. Um, but that same passion is the passion that I bring to the way that I see the world now, what I advocate for.
Mm.
Um, and it's just something that's very central to me and I guess makes me. And I wanted to know if you guys had something that you could kind of come up with that makes you, Rich, or you, Dr. Ricardo.
You know what? I can honestly say that I've had this sense of, and I know where it comes from. It comes from my mother, and this sense of fairness. I've always, and that's one of the things that I pride myself in the class, that I treat everybody equally and fair. Um, as you know, if somebody comes into I'll tell people right out the gate on the first day, if you come in late, that's going to influence I'm being fair. I'm telling everybody, I'm letting them all know, that is treating everyone fair. If you come in on time, you're going to be in a higher regard to me, whatever that might be. But then also, kind of back to the bullying thing, and if I see that, I'll bring that up to others and say, hey, listen, that's not fair. And so I think that that's one of the things that um, I've tried to. I can't say that my whole entire life. I am sure I know that as a as a child, and as an adolescent, and maybe as a teenager, I mean, and young adult, maybe I was quite selfish, and there were times when I was, quite selfish towards myself, even though I want to believe that I was still fair. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. But as an adult, I've thought a lot about that, and especially as a professor, I've tried to push that. Rich, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. You do have that trait. I think as long as I've known you, we've known each other decades and decades and decades now. So I definitely, and interestingly, I look at you and you seem like the same person you were 20, 30, maybe 30. Has it been that long? I don't know, a long time ago. 25 years ago or whatever. You really do. You seem in many respects fundamentally the same. In spite of changes, I would say the core Herb is still there. So, and as far as me, I mean, as I said, I've been married for 40 years, and I've stayed the same person enough to, to maintain that, and Herb knows. I mean, we're probably, and as time goes on, because of circumstances, it was more and more so. We are probably more connected than even most couples are, I would say. But I can think of things that from when I was a child, and I'll bring them up with my wife, who's known me since we were children. I have a letter she wrote me in third grade. So,
Oh,
Everybody reacts that way. And I'll say something. God, I'm right. I'll be so like, I'm really getting absent-minded, or I'm really getting, because I've always been angsty about life. I need to know the meaning of it all, or else it all seems futile. Which, of course, I know I'll never attain, but it's just always plagued me. And I'll say, they think I'm getting neurotic about that. And she'll say, you were like that 40 years ago. I mean, it's not like you're getting anyway. You were always that way. So there you go. I mean, if that's any measure of the fact that there may be a core dominant character trait that's persisted throughout my life, I guess there is, contrary to apparently to the evidence from that famous study, which according to them, right, indicates that none of us is the same as we were when we were younger. Interestingly, right? So I don't know, and maybe it's the way they're doing the test that makes it seem that way. Because my guess is that that was a great question you asked, Alicia. Because I would think if you asked almost anybody that, they certainly feel a sense of continuity throughout their lives. And
Hmm.
again, I don't know if that's just conditioning, because our society so much places that stamp on you, and you got to live under the right with that sense of self-identity in your head as your backdrop throughout your life, even no matter what changes you go through. But I don't know, it does really instinctively seem, the Eastern philosophies that I like, there's Buddhism, which has this doctrine of no self, where they go to one extreme. There are a lot of Buddhist schools, not all of them, but a lot of them say all you are is this changing series of selves in succession and with different environments throughout your lives. There is no central self. But then, there's schools of philosophy in Hinduism that talk about this witness that's behind everything you do in life. That's still you in some sense there. It's not a you can put your finger on, because it has a transcendent source. You might call it God, you might call it cosmic consciousness. But there's a transcendent witness there behind all the changes you go through, and that's what enables you to maintain that continuity throughout your life. So I don't know what you guys think of that, but I think that's an interesting question to pursue, right?
So, I was thinking, I'm thinking of Bruce Springsteen in New
Okay.
Jersey, and if you think about some of the characters that he sings about,
Hmm.
let's say
Yeah.
you grew up in that small town and you stayed in
Yeah.
that small town and you were with those same friends and you never, when I say you never
Yeah.
left, okay, you went to the Poconos for a vacation. No, I'm just saying you go
Yeah. Yeah.
someplace.
Yeah.
But for the most part, versus someone who grew up in southern Mississippi or something, and then they became a lawyer, moved to New
Yeah.
York City,
Yeah.
then moved to
Yeah.
Washington D.C., worked with
Yeah.
politicians. I tend to think that yeah, is there a spectrum? Is there a spectrum of change? And as a philosopher, I would have to believe that the spectrum is relevant. Now, having said that, that same person who grew up in New Jersey and but has a child, okay, and now being a parent,
Mm.
either staying with their spouse or divorcing, all those experiences are almost the same level of experiences.
Mm.
Somebody who jumps around to all these others, right? Because suddenly
Yeah.
maybe I don't have enough money to raise my
Mm.
child or whatever. They're something's happening to them at school. They're being bad at school. I've got to bring them in, but I have to also go to work, right? All these things, and how do we put them all in? How do we equate them all the same year after year after year, right? And
Yeah.
and again, are we changing who we are every month?
Mm.
Are we a new person every month or every week?
Mm.
Um, because of the influences, and I think that's a hard one because our brains are evolving, right? The way that we think is evolving differently, just like our skin is, right? Our skin gets, the hair gets gray or whatever, as the physical conditioning does, so does maybe the mental conditioning does from birth to death, right? Through that
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
spectrum. And so, um, how can we measure that? Those two factors of the external versus the internal, and how much the internal body changing. And then, of course, we're always trying to slow it down. Well, eat this food, eat fresh fruits and vegetables to slow
Yeah,
down the aging process. Go to the gym, work out, or whatever.
yeah.
Meditate, get plenty of sleep. Right? We're
And
trying to
stay
slow.
young at heart, right?
Right, we're trying to
Yeah,
do
yeah.
this, and yet, but yet, can that really even slow this process down?
Yeah. That's great. Incidentally, I direct our listening audience and Alicia, who's probably never heard of Bruce Springsteen. No, I'm only kidding. I'm sure you have. That Glory Days is what came to mind. That song Glory Days, when you brought that up, or a lot, I guess you're right. He paints a lot of pictures of human transformation like that. But yeah, I'm sorry. Were you going to say something, Alicia?
Alicia,
No,
yeah. So again, as we kind of move into, conclusion and everything else, I think what happens is, especially with social media, at least, and obviously, we're doing this. We love to do this. The three of us love to. This is our time, and talk about authenticity. I think we try to be as authentic as we are. We're not trying to be anybody we are. We're talking about something that's interesting to us. But I think also I think there's a lot of criticism out there. I think that social media creates a critical environment, and this is one of those problems that if you're going to be part of society and you're going to be part of social media and you're going to share your ideas and your thoughts with people, recognize that even though you might put a posting out there that you think, it's a belief or whatever that you think is fairly neutral or to one side or the other, that you can get a big following of people who completely disagree with you, who start pushing judgment on who you are, and everything else. And so I think, part of understanding, how we evolve, recognize that there's a mirror, and there's an influential dynamic out there, which is, social media, that unfortunately, you make a mistake, can follow you and can influence who you are almost forever. And that's something that Antonio Tabucci didn't know about when obviously he was writing that, and recognizing that our society today can really be very unforgiving at times, and so there's a part to us that when we do things like this, that we need to be a lot more self-aware.
I think there's also the sense of giving ourselves a break, of understanding that we are an ever-changing person. It's like we're able to forgive ourselves for the things that we've done in the past. I think it's also a way of, for me, I see it's a way of being empathetic, because if I can be so many different things in just a single lifetime, who is it to say that one day I might not be a mother? I might not be uh there might be different jobs that I end up taking on. There might be different things that I end up, identities that I may take on. So the idea of kind of being empathetic and understanding of that is really helpful.
Yeah, yeah. Well, great words from you. Great words, Alicia. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And if you all want to see some more multiple personalities next week, join us again, and you'll never know which one of our guru, Rich Grego, or our fabulous Gen Z, Alicia, or your org culture guy, Ricardo here, you're going to get. But thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much. And if you all enjoy this, hit that subscribe button and keep it between the lines, and we'll see you next week. All right. Take care. Thanks for hanging out with us today. We look forward to next week as we cover another cool and fun topic. This podcast was produced by Three Lions Production and sponsored by Consulting and Training. Until next time, keep it between the lines.